we go.
Episode number 2.
Distractions. Distractions
Distractions.
is the key word that you and I had an offline discussion about.
Right.
Everybody can deal with them. Everybody has them. They come into our lives from thousands of angles. And so it dawned on us that, distractions are like the new drug.
For sure.
Maybe distractions aren't necessarily a new thing. I'm sure, they've been around for forever, but new in the sense of possibly one of the most dangerous drugs right now in regards to what gets people off track of being on a particular path they want to be on or should be on, possibly.
Right.
Anything come to mind when you think about that?
When I think about distractions in general, man, I think unintentionally, relationships. I think it's important to literally have an understanding of like what the goals are, like the individual goals are that benefit the collective, right? That benefit, the relationship as a whole, and making sure that both parties are allowed to remain committed to their specific, purposes or tasks, without allowing too much emotion to get in the way of what needs to be done. My uncle had this saying he used to say to my aunt all the time, and they were building a tax preparation business, and they were starting to make a substantial amount of money, and my aunt, she would say, I want to go to Hawaii, right? And my uncle's reply was always, Hawaii's in the basement, right? And that's where they had like the office for the tax preparation company. And he would always say this all the time. Like I would literally hear him say this at least 2 or 3 times a week. Like, Hawaii's in the basement, Hawaii's in the basement. And as I got older and I started to think about that, on my own, I understood that what he was explaining to her was like the key to what you want to do is in staying committed to what we are doing now. And so now, going to Hawaii went from being a vacation destination to a way of life. And like now they may go on so many cruises a year to where like they just can't even wait to get home. Like they're gone so much that now it's like, man, it feels good to sleep in my own bed.
Right.
And so it's like, like hustle and grind and dedicate yourself, to set goals until it becomes a way of life. And I think that's so often within the confines of a relationship, the relationship is made to kind of like compete with either what someone feels they missed out on or what they feel they're seeing on like a social media perspective or even in their circle of friends. And so it's like, do you want the appearance of it? Like, we always quote Fonte, right? Do you really want to win or just look good losing? So do you want the appearance of a successful relationship or do you want an actual successful relationship? Do you want to travel so that you look like you're doing it big, or do you really want to do it big?
Right. Which takes the work and the focus.
Right.
Yes. Definitely.
How about you?
I mean, yeah, when I think of a distraction, it used to be something more obvious, I think, in regards to, something that might not necessarily take up a lot of time, but it's definitely something that was like a clear pivot from, where myself or an individual is intended on going.
Okay.
So it's like a shift of attention. I just think a lot about how we shift attention very quickly. And so one way to put it is like this. It's like when I think back to my days in school and whatever behavior I would start to pick up in regards to how I would prepare for very challenging tests, it got really real in regards to what those habits were like. The studying habits, the isolation. I don't think I would have ever really, I didn't know another way to study, but other than to basically unplug from everything. And the more I could unplug from everything, which may sound obvious, the more focused I became. But not only that, the more that I could remember and retain. And I think that same effort is something that can be, duplicated and scaled. And I think if that's really all it is, and it's almost like, well, maybe when people say like they have writer's block, or people say, they're not creative, or they can't come up with good ideas and all these different things, maybe it's not even a matter of like what they can't do. Maybe it's just a matter of removing only the distractions from their life to the point where focus only becomes just the natural thing that they are
I can absolutely
at all times.
speak to that.
Yeah.
You're 100% right. Just at least as it pertains to me,
Right.
Right. Just being a writer myself, going through like a current stage where I feel like I have writer's block. I know it's because there's so many distractions going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think maybe, probably people who don't even, I believe personally, people who don't even think that they're like quote unquote creative people are creative people.
For sure.
Their characters are part of their creativity. I just think that what they've allowed to consume them has become the distraction. So they doubt that they are creative because they're just consuming other things all the time. But I think that essentially, everyone's sort of like gift or power is revealed through the time alone, not so much like all by themselves all the time, but the time invested in themselves to understand what they can offer or what gifts they can extract from within, kind of thing. And so, I've experimented with this a couple times throughout my life, and I've noticed like very phenomenal results each time. And one experiment was years ago where I like cut off everything. Like I didn't log into any social medias, didn't watch anything, no movies, no nothing. All I did was pretty much read a ton of books and just started training myself at certain types of crafts. I was like, I want to learn how to do this type of graphic. I'm gonna just only study how to do that type of graphic like every single day. It was almost like could I outwork myself every single day. And then what I noticed is I was picking up stuff that I might have thought was difficult 3 or 4 days before that. And I was like, man, now I got it. I just had to really push through. It's almost like extra reps or something. And I started trying that out with different with different skill sets, and especially new things. And I think this is what some people might, look at as like a stretch assignment. And so I would do things that were like a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit new, and that repetition and that sort of single focus is what allowed for me to understand those things. I would say I honestly wish I never stepped away from that approach, and I think it's something that I at least appreciate and know how to get back to it. But it is a very groundbreaking process because it is real work, and it's very challenging work in regards to staying on the pulse of something. I guess it's almost like what ET and those guys refer to as like being on 120 all the time. You're just constantly in the frame of mind of like focus, like, is this decision I'm about to make, is it the best one possible? This food I'm about to eat, is it the best food possible? It's like every single thing you do is like, is it calculated enough to where like best outcome across the board? And I think like, thinking like that, or at least trying it out, is a healthy experiment, I think, for anybody, because you have literally nothing to lose. And in fact, you'll probably walk away from it like, oh, I didn't even know I could do that, or something like that.
Let me ask you this question. How influential do you think something like environment, or what part do you feel something like environment plays on the ability to do exactly what you're talking about right now?
I'd say it's major. I would say like, living in Hawaii for a while, being surrounded by a lot of beautiful nature and sort of the simplicity of the lifestyle there definitely inspired the imagination and came with a lot of clarity because, when someone's bored in a city that's very busy or has a lot going on, that says a lot all by itself. It's like, what are you so bored about? But then when you're in a place where it's just nature and it's beautiful and you're just kind of satisfied with just the landscape, the scenery, but your mind is racing and thinking about all kinds of things, like very global type ideas. And it's almost like indication like, yeah, you don't need a lot to create a lot or think big kind of thing. And in fact, it's almost like like less is more,
Right.
in that regards, quoting my 4-year-old, you know what I'm saying? Less is more. And so, yeah, I think there's going back to just environment, like environment is probably like the foundation perhaps of how we can even be inspired or tap into a certain level of focus, what I found personally.
Okay. So here's I guess my next question. How do we what parameters can we set in place to kind of offset the distractions before they even happen? So you talked about getting off of social media and being plugged in as far as books are concerned and having these tasks that are that actually challenge you. Is there anything else that you could suggest that helps avoid the distractions, or at least in basketball training or overall in fitness, we talk about doing injury prevention so that you don't have to do rehab. Right. So is there a way that we can get to a point where we set certain things in place so that we don't have to worry about, it's almost like reverse engineering. Like we know that these things serve as distractions. What are some things that you would suggest that to the viewers and listeners that they do to avoid some of these distractions before, as they're starting to play themselves out?
Yeah, I would say from my experiences, I think it's a combination of efforts. One of them is identifying the distractions, literally almost taking time, 10 minutes aside to be like, what in my life is something I don't even need to be doing? It's just something, and how much time does it take up? Maybe you don't even have to write it down because you just know off the top of your head. And so what could I remove from my life that when I remove it, I lose no value of my life. I lose no quality of life. Now, what are the things I'm thinking about, or what are the things I'm doing with this time that have no connection to my dreams, my goals, my ambitions, but they're things that I'm doing? What is it? What are those things? And so the easy answer to that is like, well, remove them. Like just if it's for somebody who's like very addicted to content or watching Netflix or something like that, just very simple as that sounds, like I delete your account for a little bit, deactivate it, just get rid of it, save that money and just get rid of it for a little bit. It'll always be there if you want to come out of it, but I would say delete it. I think people, if you find yourself talking to certain people for hours and hours and hours and you don't really feel inspired by it and you can't really say, life is better because of it, it's more like, hey, give it a break. Cut down those conversations from like 2 hours to like 10 minutes tops or something, and just sort of like break everything down. But I think the main thing is that actually allows you to sustain some of these changes is to really look for a strong desire to be motivated from yourself so that you can continue with the change. So like, again, you kind of have to build that desire, but you almost have to see yourself transform to be inspired a little bit. It's one thing to be like motivated by other people and content and hear their story, but you're probably going to be more inspired from yourself by seeing what yourself can do. And so I think even with these little tactics and these little hacks, the main thing is being inspired enough to keep it going from within. So you have to do something or make goals so small that you can see the progress within like every 2 or 3 days of this thing you're doing. And so I think a combination of these tactics can be helpful when just really trying to find a way to sort of stay on a particular course.
Right.
You know?
I think a good rule of thumb for people to kind of like implement is like for every 1 hour of content that you consume in the form of inspiration or education, anything along those lines, I think for every 1 hour that you consume, you should also implement 2 hours. In addition to that 1 hour, you should implement 2 hours of execution. Just trying it, like just literally
Executing
going out,
something.
Yeah, just going out it. Like, so it's almost like the equivalent of when I was a kid and the And1 mixtape first hit. It was on VHS.
Right.
It was like you watched the video and then you went outside and
Over and
hooped
over.
and tried to, so like you're watching the video so that you can commit it to memory, so that you can go outside and practice it on the basketball court.
Right.
But it was like without the execution, your ball handle wouldn't grow.
Right.
Without that like, the work in real time. And I think that's what's happening now is like we have like an overload of content. There's so much content to consume. So we have like this huge amount of consumption, but like a small amount of execution. And I think that, even that, like we get to a point where, I guess the quote is paralysis by analysis, right? Like we get so consumed with content that we miss out on the opportunities to execute. And a lot of that, a lot of the, I guess, quote unquote failures would contribute to huge amounts of growth. But if you don't, if you're not outside having the at bats, like that's also like another new phrase, right? It's like I'm outside, right? Mm-hmm. And from a business perspective or from this self-help, personal development perspective, we can change kind of the narrative of what that actually means, right? Being outside means you're actually in the field of execution. So it's like, yeah, I'm outside. It means I'm outside putting the work in. I'm outside, doing whatever it takes to be successful in this particular thing that I'm trying my hand at, as opposed to, sitting somewhere in front of a laptop or a cell phone and just consuming massive amounts of content and spending the majority of my day doing that, when I could just consume a smaller amount of content and go out and execute on it and then come back and compare notes.
Definitely. I think all of these tactics are helpful, and I think that it does take a plan. I think where I went wrong throughout stages of trying to just improve and get better at things was not having a plan, to be honest. Like just kind of going with a variety of gut feelings and let me try this, let me try that. The plan doesn't have to be that deep or it doesn't have to be very extensive, but it's more like a solid statement about what it is you're trying to do, and then it's followed by some baby steps that are all action based. And I think, for me personally, that was something that I noticed was helpful. But another thing was also looking at the habits of people who I felt were extremely focused and who were high achievers, kind of thing. Like, what's in their routine? What are they doing? And I started paying attention a lot to that. And so one thing I noticed about, say, high achievers, people in like CEO positions with a lot of responsibilities and very stressed, many of them, meditate. Many of them meditate. Many of them go for walks. Many of them read a lot. They're always looking for inspiration.
Common behaviors.
Yeah. So I was looking for these behaviors. I was like, well, there clearly must be something that keeps people going and constantly inspired, almost like fuel throughout life in general. I was like, so I noticed, like, okay, I've heard several very successful people talk about meditation. Let me try that. Let me see what that's about. I don't even know if I'm doing it right, but I know me going outside away from something where it's quiet to just think, that seemed to be, sounds crazy, but that's pretty powerful. Like I thought about things that I probably wouldn't have thought about because I just put time aside to think. And it's all right. And you're just kind of like going with the flow every single day, but you don't even think about thinking or think about what you're thinking about. We're just kind of reacting to so much. And so, yeah, even as simple as it sounds, the idea of let me just put some time aside to think gives a lot of clarity. And that was a huge thing. And again, I noticed several people, from afar and from people I would meet, who I would ask like straight up, like, what's your routine? What's your thing? What's your life's philosophy? What do you live by? What do you go by? Just really being curious. And I think we're all inspired by other people to some extent. And I think, we all cross paths with a lot of people. So there's a lot to be learned from, the people in our circles, the people outside of our circles, and just really taking a little bit of gems from all these different places, and sort of taking what you like and building up your own sort of magic formula.
Right.
You know, I think, when I think about, the whole premise of, again, this everyday get it, sort of lifestyle and theme that we're building, I always think of this scenario where, and this scenario keeps repeating itself, where it's like an individual, this could be anybody in any walk of life, individual is at a certain age, and they find themselves thinking backwards too much. And they're like, man, if I was in high school again, I would do this different. I would do this different. I would read books every day. I would work out every day. I would do all this stuff, and I would do it just right. And it's kind of hypocritical, because it's like, well, if you know what you would do differently, why don't you do it today?
Right.
Why don't you do it right now?
That's good.
Why are you not doing what you said you would do, as if the time you have left, like you ran out or something? And I think that thought, or even having even a fraction of that thought, brings fear to me. It's like, I don't even want to think like that even a little bit. And I think that thought is what Everyday Get It is supposed to be about, in regards to, this is the opposite approach to that type of thought. It's almost like treat today with the most positive, sort of energetic, energy and spirit you can, in regards to just really going all out. Don't really look back and think about, the could and the should type scenarios. And I think whatever you would call that energy that's going to allow you to do the absolute best in the moment, focused in the moment, to make the most of the moment, like that's what I'm trying to really even learn more about for myself. But then obviously get people to also think on that level. Like, you don't really hear too many happy, successful people dwell on the past, if at all. They're always talking about, even people who've got like milestones and milestones of like these beautiful things they've done in their life. They're still looking ahead, looking forward. Like, I can't wait to do this next. I can't wait to do that next. And I think these are things that I say all that because it's like, well, individuals oftentimes are consumed by their memory. Their memory is like the data within. So it's hard to for many to think outside of what they've seen, what they know. And so life gets into this like very repetitive thing. You feel like you're in this routine. You're eating the same foods. You're driving the same routes. You're doing so much that's the same. Yet in your mind, you're like, well, if I went back, I'd do everything different. It's like, well, why not do different now? And I think different now means just better and better and better and better. Any way you can identify it.
I think what you're saying, I agree. First and foremost, but I think what you're saying speaks to this very specific way of thinking for a lot of people, which and we always talk about like history repeating itself, right? And I think the reason why history repeats itself so often is because we live in the past on a consistent basis. Like, we're constantly talking about what we are used to, what things used to be, what we didn't have. All I knew was these are constant statements that we make almost religiously, right? Like, Indeed. No one ever taught me how. I never knew that this was available.
Right.
Like, they didn't teach this in school. I didn't get this in my upbringing. This wasn't a part of how I was raised. But now you're having a conversation about it. Now you're aware. So what are you doing now?
Right.
What are you doing? And I think that we kind of have to do a better job of replacing memories, right? Like, okay, so that if you can, if you're an adult, right? Let's say 25 and up. If you're at that age now in your life where you can be classified as an adult, and the majority of your memories are filled with all of these negative experiences, you owe it to yourself to replace those memories with positive experiences, right? So it's like you'll only qualify for the jobs that your resume says you qualify for. So if the only thing you've ever achieved in your life was all this heartache and pain, then those are the jobs that you qualify for. You only qualify for the jobs that consist of heartache and pain. But if you get to the point where you at least try this job so that I can acquire this skill, right? Let me try love, right? Without blaming anyone. Let me try, increasing credit scores. Let me try. So now your resume is extensive. Now you can apply for these different jobs that create all of these new memories. And before long, it's like, man, I'm so far removed from that. Like, I don't even remember a time when I can remember it, but I almost can't feel it anymore. I can't relate to it in that sense. Like, I can talk to you from an outer body experience perspective, but not necessarily where, like, because sometimes people will talk to you about certain things and it's something that happened 30 years ago, but when it's so real to them and so recent in memory that when they're talking about it, you'll feel like it just happened yesterday.
It just happened earlier that day. Same emotion, same whatever it is, anger, excitement, whatever it is, it's all there. Almost as though, they're holding on to something in the past.
Right.
And it's almost like a chain, or it's like something you feel like a part of them is being held back by.
For sure.
But yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that many times.
There should be way more space between us and that.
Right. Whatever that is.
Like if you were to go and apply for another job, you wouldn't have the first 5 jobs that you ever worked listed on your resume.
Right.
You wouldn't even mention those jobs.
Right.
Like you're so far removed.
It's the most current and the most relevant.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't dare go apply for a job as a graphic designer and list the fact that you worked at Taco Bell or McDonald's. Is like,
right. So why carry these random memories the same way? Yeah. And I think, I don't know if this is getting into a different subject, but I think it's a matter of doing something new and different to replace the old. So when you think about people who haven't moved on from something, it's usually because, they haven't dealt with it, or they haven't dealt with the theme of whatever that thing categorized itself. And so some people haven't dealt with loss in a certain way. So they think back to someone or something they may have lost. And it's like they talk about it. It's like it just happened.
Right.
And it's the same thing with a situation, whatever it is. Somebody took advantage of them. Somebody did them wrong, disrespected them decades ago.
Right.
Emotion is still there, as if whatever happened is still like a current problem in their modern world, and somehow applies to like this sort of ghostly like figure floating around modern society, like the same thing, as if the same thing's going to happen again and over. And I think, these are human thoughts that oftentimes, people that hold people back. But I think, again, just focusing on what is and what isn't a distraction, being held and captive by your own memories that you put in there is a major distraction, especially if it's not taking you to no new heights or new place. So,
and I hope no one takes this the wrong way. I hope they take it exactly the way I intended, and it's for growth purposes. But a lot of times, what I see, in our culture, is someone who is quote unquote reformed, supposedly, woke, whatever phrase you want to use. It's amazing to me how necessary they feel it is to remind you what they come from, right? Let me give you an example. I'm now working with children, and I'm super positive, and I'm all about giving back to the community and doing this good work within the community, right? But somebody says something to me that I don't like, and now I feel the need to, like, on my social media or just in general, let you know that don't get it twisted just because you see me out here doing this positive thing. I'll still pop your head off your shoulders. Like, this is what I come from. And it's like, man, like, at what point do we grow enough to where we burn that boat? Right? Like, we find a way, a new way of dealing with confrontation and situations that make us uncomfortable to where we don't even have to revert back to that. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I used to honestly have a hard time, and I'm working on this now. I had a hard time being assertive because I connected being assertive with being a jerk. Like, I didn't know that there was separation. Like, you know, growing up the way that I grew up, you only operate within two extremes, right? One of the two, which is you're really kind and you're probably going to get taken advantage of, or, like, you know, or you're like a savage, right? Like, you're ready to pop off. And this is why, you know, you'll have, like, oftentimes people who say things like, I'm just honest. You know, I just keep it real. And it's like, nah, you're just rude. You're not keeping it real. You're disrespectful, right? Like, there's a way that you can be assertive and get your point across and be heard without having to be rude, without having to be disrespectful. I didn't know that for a long time in my life. I had no idea that that was possible. I thought in order to be assertive, mm-hmm. you know, and we've had conversations about, you know, being assertive, right? And so it forced me to look back and say, well, man, why was I so apprehensive? Like, why do I feel this anxiety of, like, almost fight or flight when it comes time to be assertive and stand up for myself? And it's because any time in my past, growing up, you know, where I grew up, it's like, it's go time, mm-hmm. right? Usually when that happens, it's time to fight.
Right.
You know, so I had no idea for the longest time that you could be assertive without being a jerk. Mm-hmm. I just assumed that when you're assertive, you have to be ready to fight. Mm. Right? Like, that's what that means. Like, I'm basically drawing a line in the sand and I'm saying that, yo, this is how I feel. I'm standing on this and I'll do anything to protect this. But, like, in the real world, you don't have to have that fine of a line drawn in the sand. You can just stand on what you're saying confidently without conflict.
Right. You think you thought you saw it from sort of a conflicted state of mind because it was just the majority of what you saw. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't so much of you almost, like, for lack of better words, you created a fear or a what if scenario in your mind without mm-hmm. playing it out, the assertive role, because you would assume that if you did the assertive thing, it would go negative somehow. Gotcha. Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't like being told no.
Yeah, no, or told something differently or alternative,
or like, I don't agree with that.
Right, for sure. And then like you said, assertiveness, something I dealt with and we talked about. Yeah, speaking up for yourself, mm-hmm. for someone else. That's gonna brush against another force where it might feel like tension. And I think, the personality types are like, oh, no, we don't want no tension with nobody, you know, so let it slide, let it be. And then what it would end up happening is, like, you'll look back later like, I should have said something. Then you go looking back again.
You sit in the car and you're like, man, when they said that, I should have said this.
Yeah. You know? You're, like, going off on yourself because you're like, man, I should have said better next time I'll do it. And that's again, that's going back to this whole thing of, like, man, you want to be so present and clear and free of the mind mm-hmm. that you're comfortable with what it is you're going to do and say in the moment.
Right.
And I think, again, going back to that time, like, well, I have time to think. So therefore, I have time to think about the type of person I want to be, mm-hmm. how I want to speak.
Yep.
You even have time to do what I call, like, scenario analysis. It's something. It's like, I often think about how I would respond to different types of personalities and people sometimes I'll never even meet those people, but I might see someone from afar. I'm like, how would I even deal with a person like that? And it's like, okay, I think I would say something like this, and I think I would, how might I have reacted to like this debate I heard of, like, oh, you know what, I would go at it like this. And so I think that has helped me reinforce being more assertive, because at least in a way I've kind of like mentally tricked myself for, say, more uncomfortable conversations, or how to more, quickly speak up, or and listen better, but then also speak up, proactively when the time is right. I'm saying, oh, you hear something and something doesn't sound quite right, so you gotta respond in the moment, because if you don't, it's almost like you and others let it slide.
Right.
And there may come a time where it's like, oh, that's not something that you or anyone should let slide, especially if it goes against, values or things you stand for. So I think it really is all connected to focus, because if and when you're focused, you essentially know the best version of yourself, and you sort of know the best way to articulate that, communicate that. And if you're distracted, and maybe in this case we can be distracted by our own thoughts or fears.
Yeah, no, and that's why I'm even bringing it up, because, and it's good that we even talk about this, because I think that sometimes that in and of itself, the idea of the conflict, what happens when I assert myself, that can be a distraction, and prevent people from moving forward.
Yeah, taking any step.
Right,
Yeah.
because you don't even know how to walk into an office and confidently ask for a raise based on performance.
Right.
Right, and value that you add. You don't know how to exist in a relationship and demand more based on what you bring to the table, because you're so afraid of the conflict that comes from asserting yourself.
Right.
That you just allow whatever to take place without saying no. There's a standard here that we need to live by. There are principles and morals that this relationship has to be governed by. That if it's not, then it can't go. It can't go forward. There's no way we're gonna grow if we continue to live lawlessly.
Yeah.
There's cause and effect, right? So you can't expect a certain individual to be a certain way all the time, no matter what you do.
Right.
Right. These things are not promised without compromise, without reason.
Right.
You can't do whatever you want and still hold a person to being who they said they were going to be.
Right.
It's not.
And here's the danger of not speaking up and not being assertive, which I learned later from experiences. People will get used to a certain type of version of who you are. Mm-hmm. So if you all of a sudden have this great awakening where it's like, you know what, I got to call everything out as I see it, or it'll seem like night and day to be like, who is this person with all these opinions and everything now? And it's like, which is why, not to say that you shouldn't change it or we shouldn't change it, it's more like the sooner we get to that point, the better for everyone, even those around us. Because it's like, because that's what the other side of it is. The other side of it is, well, if we don't speak up enough and react enough properly and in the right way, we create a sort of a culture around us that's unbalanced.
Right.
Because we're not necessarily responding and reacting in the way we ought to be. And so basically it's like it's actually dangerous to not be assertive, to not speak up and make your voice, present, because what ends up happening is you become controlled. You become controlled in a way or that you don't want to be, and you could drive yourself crazy.
No one ever says that.
Yeah.
It's just always, it's almost, even when you're encouraged to speak up for yourself, it's more so you can't let people walk all over you. You got to tell them like it is.
Yeah.
That's the way, being assertive is introduced. And that's very uncomfortable for people.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be.
Right.
It doesn't have to always be met with that energy, right? On the flip side of it is there are tons of people who are assertive, but they don't have any what they call emotional intelligence, or it's how you say what you say. You know what I'm saying? You can ask someone the very same question. One way can sound genuine, one way can sound concerning, one way can sound mean, one way can sound condescending. And it's the same question, you know, same question. And so I think even just being mindful of that is a big deal. It's a big deal. Like just even being mindful of tone and energy, it can control what happens next, basically. What happens next in this scenario. And knowing that and obviously knowing that in other people helps you and helps one another. And so why is this important to focus and distractions? Because if you're distracted, you don't notice any of the stuff going on. So if we don't become more focused and more aware of our senses and things like that, then we miss out on sort of the symbols that are around us and the symbols that are revealed through the people in our lives and the messages we're getting and all these things. And so when those links are missing, it's very chaotic in terms of day-to-day life or day-to-day communications. I can very easily see how people get layers and layers of like misunderstandings and things like that. It's because you're distracted in one case, but you're present with like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Your thoughts are all over the place. You're a little bit here, you're a little bit there. So it's very easy to just lose, sight of like, well, day-to-day life, is this the best possible outcome? Are these the best things that are happening? And if it's not, is it because my mind is in a bunch of other places and another person's mind is in a bunch of other places? And so the conflict of that alone is something, sort of unmeasured. It's like, well, what does this actually look like for us, and how do we get out of it? And I think another thing that goes back to a point of like, there's a lot to be said about just pure personal satisfaction that comes from individuals who do feel like they're on this path of like growth and progress, because generally speaking, when people feel like that, it's just a lot better of a vibe, a lot better of a chemistry among, from one person to another, relationship, group, work setting, all in all. Like when you're in a room full of optimistic, progressive, focused people, you could change the world, right? Like
sure.
The right minds at the right table, the right couple, et cetera, et cetera. It's like family, on and on and on. And so it kind of benefits everyone to really have a good sense of like serious focus. It's kind of dangerous, I would say, to be scatterbrained. It's like we all gotta have something that we are really into, motivated by, inspired to do, that gives us that sort of extra life that comes out of us, because it's very easy to tell when something's missing, and distractions will definitely make sure that a lot of things are missing from what should be there, what should be present.
Right. Well, brother, I think what I hope that, just kind of opens up some new train of thought for the listeners. Everybody that's out there, if you have any questions, please hit us up in the comment section. Hit us up via email. Hit us up in the DM, and ask us some questions, because like ultimately this content is being produced for you, to help you through some of the things that we feel may have been a hindrance to us in our process of building businesses, and just even getting to know yourself better. And that's why it's this mindset of like every day get it, because every day you almost have to die to self. Every day you have to kind of like dissect yourself a little bit and kind of figure out what can you chip away at that serves no purpose, and what do you need to keep and kind of build upon that allows you to take things to the next level. And it's a process. Some people tap out. Some people say, nope, the house and the car was enough for me. I'm good. I'm out of it. That's not the everyday get it mindset, but I understand why that happens, because it is a lot of work. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that's required when you want to be self-aware and constantly work on yourself and challenge yourself to grow. It's not easy. Some days you could just, feel beat just from thinking about the things that you have to do in the process and setting these things in place. You could feel exhausted. So definitely, if you feel led to, if you got any questions, hit us up, and to the best of our ability, We'll definitely interact with you and get those questions answered. And if there's some things that you feel like you want us to discuss on the podcast, please hit us up and let us know. Man, you got anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, man. I think you said it. I think in closing, I think one good assignment for everybody out there. This is all personal, but I think really think about what it is you want to do, and if every day you can give that thing some positive energy, some positive effort, some training, that the outcome is almost guaranteed. Something you're guaranteed to get something better 10 days from now, 20 days from now, 30 days from now, because you gave it that thought and then you gave it some action as opposed to not. And so any little thing you have to remove from your life and sort of to put yourself in a position where you do successfully feel more focused, more concentrated. I would love to hear that as well in terms of like what that is for you. Because I think, this is a two-way form of communication. Everybody's has a story that can inspire another person. And there's no hierarchy to this. I think every person, every common person that's really striving to do something better has something major to offer. And so so I would love to hear, what people are either going to do in the future or what things that they've been successful at doing in terms of sort of getting into that zone, what we call tapping into that zone of focus and performing at a high level. And I would also like to say, tell us, when was the time you felt like you were in that zone and of that high performance and level, and what did it feel like? And were you conscious in the moment, or were you unconscious? You were just doing it. Were you just in a state of flow, as they put it? And we would love to sort of study what that is and what that means to you. What is sort of in the zone for you, and may that be something we all strive to be in. So until next time, thanks for watching.
I want to leave you guys with this real quick. Every day you got to get up and go get it. If not, what troubles you will get you. Peace.
Peace.